bombings, officials have been given the go-ahead to call up as many as 50,000 reservists in the coming days. And as Leon Harris pointed out there, the military really putting itself almost in a war footing at this point. The personnel will be used to protect U.S. airspace, and they will help in the aftermath of Tuesday's terrorist attacks. Meanwhile, Pakistan is pledging now to fully cooperate with the United States as the government here considers how to proceed with its fight against terrorism. That's a critical point because Pakistan is considered closely linked to Osama bin Laden and his network of terrorism. Taliban leaders in Afghanistan issued a statement today threatening any neighboring country, meaning Pakistan, that would allow its soil to be used to help launch a U.S. attack of any kind against Afghanistan. Meanwhile, back here in the United States, you are looking at the place we have called Ground Zero. It is an apt term for what you're looking at. This is what was once the World Trade Center. The search has not yielded any survivors since Wednesday. Searchers remain hopeful. There are many sub-basements, and there were many sub-basements, I should point out, in that building. More than 4,700 people, 4,700 people still missing in New York City. New York City is where we find Paula Zahn. Good morning, Paula.
Thanks, Miles. I was just going to add to what you were saying about this harsh statement coming out of Afghanistan today from its religious rulers of the Taliban, basically, once again, saying that threatening any country that allows its soils to be used to help the United States stage an attack on Afghanistan. Quick note here, there are now 19 men identified as suspected hijackers in Tuesday's terrorist attacks against the United States. They are all believed to be directly or indirectly linked to Osama bin Laden, who, of course, has been protected by the ruling Taliban of Afghanistan. Right now, we go to Nick Robertson, who is standing by in Kabul with the latest. What is the reaction to this statement, Nick?
Well, Paula, that's exactly what the Taliban were trying to do early this morning when they issued their statement warning, essentially without saying Pakistan, but essentially warning Pakistan. They issued that statement just when the Pakistani government was about to sit down and decide the level of support. Now, clearly, it's gone ahead and given its full support to the United States, but that Taliban statement was clearly designed to try and influence that meeting, saying that any neighboring country, in particular an Islamic country, that they should think very carefully about allowing their soil or airspace to be used by the United States, and essentially threatening that if they did, then they would gather an army together and invade that country. Taliban spokesman earlier today said that in Pakistan.
If neighboring or regional countries, particularly Islamic countries, gave a positive response to American demand for military bases, it would spark up extraordinary danger. Similarly, if any neighboring country gave territorial way or airspace to USA against our land, it would draw us into an imposed war.
And certainly there's a lot of debate here in Afghanistan amongst the religious scholars and the tribal elders who give a lot of influence to the people of Afghanistan. We heard of a meeting earlier today with over 100 of these tribal elders close to the border with Pakistan, and they have huge sway of influence over several tribes in that area. And essentially what they were saying was they wanted America to consider carefully what it was doing. They say Afghanistan is an impoverished country and to attack it would be unjust. Interestingly as well, however, they also urged the Taliban leadership not to close down on the door of diplomacy, to continue to talk through issues. Those tribal elders also, however, said that if Afghanistan was attacked, then they said that all tribes in Afghanistan would throw their support behind the Taliban leadership. And certainly the spiritual leader of the Taliban, when he addressed the nation by radio last night, was really gearing them up to expect war and telling everyone that they may have to, like their fathers and grandfathers, lay down their lives for the sake of Islam. Paula?
Well, it would seem that the State Department isn't giving these nations an easy choice. The State Department met with some 15 Arab representatives yesterday. They're saying, join us or risk being isolated in a growing global conflict. What kind of leverage do you think, given the statement from the Taliban, the United States actually has with Pakistan?
Well, the United States certainly has some leverage with Pakistan. Certainly Pakistan in recent months has been looking to resolve its long outstanding dispute with India over the region of Kashmir. And certainly if Pakistan is going to get that issue resolved to its satisfaction, then it needs the political support of the United States. Pakistan is also a country whose economy is in a very, very poor shape, and they just cannot afford to be isolated from the rest of the world, which if they decided to side with the Taliban and not with the rest of the world, they would become isolated. And I think that's been very clear to the leadership in Pakistan at this time. There are certainly many issues that weigh on General Pervez Musharraf, the leader of Pakistan's mind at this time. Afghanistan and Pakistan share a lot of tribes, so the tribes in Afghanistan have a lot of influence in Pakistan. There are a certain large following for some of the more Muslim fundamentalist groups in Pakistan. These groups, those tribes, could make a lot of trouble for General Musharraf, but clearly he's felt he has no other option at this time than to side with the United States, and that is going to be keenly felt here in Afghanistan. The Taliban, the Afghan people rely on Pakistan for trade, for their economy, for the food on their tables. There is a huge degree of support necessary just for their physical survival here in Afghanistan on Pakistan. To see that potentially wither up and die is going to be not only worrying for the government, but also very worrying for the people of Afghanistan. Paula?
Nick, one last question for you. The Taliban, of course, saying earlier this week that Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with this. Is there a belief there in Kabul that Osama bin Laden is still in that country, in Afghanistan?
Well, we've been given no reason to doubt that he's still here. There are indications that he may be moving around and changing his hiding place. That would certainly be reasonable to expect him to do that in this situation. But generally speaking, there's no reliable information as to his exact whereabouts, and there's certainly no public change in the Taliban's position of support for him. And also speaking to people on the street, there's certainly no change in their support for Osama bin Laden and the sanctuary that he has here in Afghanistan. It's perhaps important to note when listening to what those tribal elders had to say earlier today, they weren't necessarily defending Osama bin Laden as the Taliban leadership have done in the past. They were urging the Taliban not to close the door on diplomacy, but also telling America to look carefully for its real enemies. But it was interesting that they didn't perhaps give the same backing to Osama bin Laden that the leadership here has been, but perhaps that's reading the tea leaves too far at this time, Paula.
Nick Robertson, thank you so much for that in-depth report. We appreciate it. We reported a little bit earlier on this morning there has been one arrest that federal agents have made, and apparently the information that suspect or this person they're questioning has given them has been fruitful. Let's go down to Eileen O'Connor now for a broader look at what the investigations are yielding at this point. Good morning, Eileen.
Good morning, Paula. Well, this investigation has an ever-increasing sense of urgency as airports open. Law enforcement sources say investigators say that there is an ever-widening circle of people that they have on a watch list, and they believe that there were other planes that were supposed to be hijacked or other targets hit, but somehow those planes were thwarted when some of the planes were also kept on the ground or detoured. 2 men were detained under INS violations in Texas and have been taken to New York City for questioning. One is Mohammed Jawed Asmath, and the other is Ayub Ali Khan. Now, both of these men possessed tickets, according to sources, on a Newark flight bound to San Antonio on Tuesday. That flight was rerouted to St. Louis. From there, they got onto an Amtrak Amtrak train headed to St. Louis. The train was headed to San Antonio from St. Louis. The train was stopped and they were pulled off. Now, sources say they did have box cutters on them, similar to ones that people on the flight said the hijackers used. In addition, the man arrested in New York on a material witness warrant, sources say, was trying to pass himself off with a pilot's license issued to his brother. As you said, he's seen as very important. Now, there are others being sought connected to Texas and to other flight schools in Florida, especially in the Vero Beach area. In addition, there was also a man with French-Algerian documents who is being tracked by authorities near Boston in the summer, according to sources. Authorities won't say if he is in custody, but he is being seen as connected to this case. In his apartment, authorities say, according to sources, that they found aviation material on Boeing planes and also that he was attending flight school. Now, again, some of these men who have been detained, they may well be cleared because, again, the authorities and sources are saying they're being looked at, there are things, but they could be coincidences. So we must warn you that this is very fluid. FBI Director Robert Mueller said yesterday that if they had known that these men were studying at flight schools, they might have prevented this. Paula?
So, Eileen, I know you said the situation is very fluid, and we know the amount of information we're getting is incremental. Give us your sense, given the kind of information you've just expressed that is coming out of some of these folks being questioned, where federal investigators are in the investigation.
Well, they believe that they are proceeding. They are at least widening this net. And one of the things that they're looking at, of course, are people linked to flight schools, people linked by family, perhaps, to some of the hijackers, and they are pursuing those people. Those are the kinds of people that you're seeing on this watch list. We're also doing things like running addresses, which are the kinds of things that we're doing, and then seeing people who lived in addresses that the hijackers lived in, or associates of the hijackers lived in. Now, some of these people aren't being taken in. They are going to be perhaps material witnesses who can just give a lot of information about associates of the hijackers. But it is an ever-widening net, Paula.
And what is the critical information that investigators are trying to glean now?
Well, one of the things they're trying to glean is, are there other plans? That's the one that's really urgent. And who else is behind this? And where they are. They could be, have already be in other countries. And they have to see also where the ties lead back. Increasingly, Paula, investigators are seeing a lot of ties to groups associated with Osama bin Laden. And so that is certainly tightening their case and their proof and building their case against Osama bin Laden, as the Secretary of State said, as a prime suspect. It's very difficult, Paula, to get information on this. This is one of the most tightly held investigations I've ever worked on terrorist activities. But they are saying, shows you their urgency, that they may go public with some of these names because they really do want to find these people. Paula?
Well, I think you're doing a darn good job of trying to piece all of these disparate chunks together. Thank you, Eileen.
Thanks.
And right now we head back down to Atlanta, where Miles O'Brien has even more on the investigation. Miles, what do you got?
All right, Paula, let's just bring things up to date. We'll use a map to give you an idea of the global extent of this investigation, unprecedented criminal investigation, and give you an idea of some of the places where things are happening right now. Some of this might be a little bit repetitive from what Eileen was just saying, but it's worth going through anyway. First of all, those two suspects, or not suspects, but detainees who were picked up in Texas, who were in the possession of box cutters and were on a flight on Tuesday morning, now headed to New York. They're going to be questioned there, and hopefully will provide some additional information for investigators. Once again, sort of underscoring the point that what we may be seeing thus far is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, the big news, the arrest in New York of the material witness, one of those people that was involved in that JFK arrest on Thursday, precipitated the shutdown of the airport. We weren't sure what the link was. Now it appears there's an arrest involved and might lead to further information for these investigators. Perhaps unrelated, but who knows at this point. Police in Europe now have two detainees who they picked up after conducting an investigation, determining that they had targeted U.S. interests in Europe. We're not sure what those U.S. interests are, but whenever you're talking about things like that, think of military bases, think of embassies, of course. They were charged with possessions of weapons of war, specifically an Uzi pistol and some ammunition which might have been used in those attacks. And finally, the schools. Down in Florida, of course, those air schools continue to be a focus of attention. And also in California, a very well-known aviation school, the King Schools. John and Martha King, frequent visitors here on CNN on the subject of aviation. They're the largest school producing CD-ROMs and other material which pilots would use to learn their trade. Their particular building was searched by, or their records were